Hi, my name's Susan Jessop and welcome to Langley Centennial Museum. I've recently started as an instructor for the museum, but I also work as a professional artist. I have a studio in Vancouver and I make artwork using paper collage. So I'm going to show you some of mine today. Here's one that I made. So what I do is I use old books and magazines and I cut out things that I like within those, and then I use glue and I paste my images onto another piece of paper to make pictures that I'm interested in. So here's one that I framed. This one was all about being outdoors, being in nature and exploring. So today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the programs that Langley Centennial Museum offers, and that's called Emily Carr Coastal Images. So it's a program that's offered to school kids across the Lower Mainland, and I've been involved in teaching some of those programs. And we're going to talk a little bit about Emily Carr. It's a very famous Canadian artist, and then we're going to make a picture out of watercolour, which is inspired by her artwork. So I'm going to tell you a bit about Emily. Emily was born in 1871 in Victoria, BC. And from a very early age, she was really interested in nature and being outdoors. And she also loved art. She loved to paint. She was also a great animal lover too. When she was older, she studied in San Francisco. And later on, she went to Europe, where she met lots of famous artists, and all of these artists were being really experimental with their paintings. So when she returned to Victoria, Emily decided that she wanted to experiment as well. So she started to use really big, bold shapes in her work and very rich and vibrant colours. She was an unusual character, and the people of Victoria thought she was a bit eccentric. But this may be because she was a little unkempt, because she used to think more about art than she did about what she looked like. And she also had a lot of animals, and sometimes she'd take the animals on walks with her around the town. And she had dogs and cats and birds, and she even had a pet monkey called Woo. Now we're going to look at one of Emily's paintings today. This is a painting. So one of the things that Emily liked to do was she liked to go out into nature, she liked to go into the forests, and she explored extensively across BC. She was also fascinated by the First Nations art and culture, and in particular things like totem poles, which she included in her paintings. One of the things Emily liked to do when she went out was she would look around and she would decide what she wanted to paint. And she would spend a lot of time just looking. So she'd sit in a chair in front of a forest or a tree, and she'd just look and look and look. And this is one of her paintings. This is called Little Pine, and it was made in 1931. And you can see here that Emily was influenced by some of those artists that she met in Europe, because she started to simplify some of the shapes of the trees. And she's used a lot of varied colour within her work. Now, what I'd like us to do is I'd like to be inspired by some of the trees of BC, and I'd like you to make a painting, a watercolour painting. So you may be lucky enough to have a tree that you can see just outside your window, or you may have one or two in your backyard, or I'm sure there are some in your neighbourhood that you can go and explore as well. So first of all, I'd like you to choose your subject, which today is going to be trees, and choose one of those trees that you can see or you can go and visit. And I'm going to ask you some questions about the trees to help you to look more closely. So first of all, I'd like you to think, what shape is a tree? What kind of shape is it? Is it round, squarish? Is it like an oval? And also, how big is a tree? So is it a really huge tree, or is it a small young tree? Then I'd like you to think about the colours that you can see on your tree. So you might be surprised that the more you look, the more colours you'll see. For instance, if we look at the trunk of a tree, it's not always brown. Sometimes it has greys and blues and oranges and even yellows in it. And think about the colour of the leaves. What kind of green is it? Is it bluish green, a yellowish green, a light green? Where's the lightest part of a tree that you can see? And also, where's the darkest part of a tree? Now, the other thing I'd like you to think about is about the texture. Now, you may be lucky enough to be able to touch the tree, and if you can, what does that feel like? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Or is it something in between? And finally, I'd like you to think that if you could just go like that and the tree would become a person, what kind of character would they have? What would they be like? So, thinking about all those questions, we're going to make a watercolour painting, and we're going to think about and keep looking at the tree as you make your painting. So, to make your painting, you're going to need some materials. So we need a piece of paper. So I have a piece of watercolour paper which is nice and thick, so it can hold lots of water, but if you don't have that, that's okay. You can use any kind of paper. And I've got some brushes as well, so you maybe need 3 or 4. They range from small to quite large. And then you need some paints, and these ones are very simple. You might have them in your house, but you can also buy them very easily at the dollar store as well. And I've also got a palette, which I may use, but you can also use the top of your paint here. This is called a palette, and you can mix your colours in here. And you also need some water, so you need a jam jar of water. And we're going to start off by using a pencil, and we're going to make a very quick sketch of the tree. So, depending on how you're looking at it, you might want to use your paper this way, or you might want to turn it up the other way if it's a very tall, long tree and you want to get all of it in. And so, I'm just going to start, and I'm going to be inspired by Emily's tree, and I'm going to do a very light sketch. Now, a sketch is different from a drawing, because a drawing is going to be your finished product. But if you do a sketch, you're going to use very light pencil, and you're just going to do very simple shapes on it. And really the sketch is just to guide you, so that you know where to put the paint on when you go to start painting. And it doesn't take very long either, so you don't want to spend too much time, and you don't want to put any detail. Now, detail could be things like small leaves or the texture of the bark or other things like that. So you want to keep it very, very kind of loose. So you need to do a very quick sketch. Keep looking at your tree. Just put in the very basic shapes and simplify those shapes. So this is something that Emily did when she made her paintings. She made all the shapes very, very simple. So I'm just going to do just a little bit, but you can spend a bit longer on this if you want to. But really, you don't want to do much more than that. So I have some very simple shapes for the tree, and I've put some other bushes in as well, and some background too. And then we're going to start painting. So, to start our watercolour painting, what we're going to do is we're going to start to mix up some colours. So don't be satisfied with the colours that you have in your paint palette, because when you look at a tree, and when you look at the trees in your neighbourhood or in your backyard, you'll see that there's lots of different colours on them. So you're going to spend a bit more time than I am, but we're going to take some of the paint and we're going to put it in the top here. And we're going to start to mix up some of the colours until we get a colour that most resembles the one that you can see on your tree. So I'm just going to get a couple ready for when we start painting. And the other thing that you can do is you can kind of mix up some of these colours together as you go along. So I've got 2, and then just before you begin painting, what you need to do is you need to wet your piece of paper. So get your biggest brush and then just cover the entire surface of your paper with some water. Now, the secret of watercolour is that you don't want to go over the same spot too many times, because what will happen is the paper will get too soggy, and then when you do paint on top, it starts to kind of break up and go a bit bobbly. So just very simply cover every part of it till it's damp, like that. And then once you've done that, you can start to paint. So you need to remember to keep dipping your paintbrush into your water so that your paint doesn't go dry, because the best thing about watercolour painting is that it's watery. So I'm going to start off. So I now have my piece of paper and I've dampened it with water with my bigger brush, and I've mixed up some different colours. So for the sky, I started to mix a little bit of blue and a little bit of orange, and add a little bit more here. And when you make a watercolour, what you need to do is you need to do the largest areas first. So the paper's nice and wet. When I start to put the paint on, you'll see what happens. So I'm going to do my background, and my background in this case is the sky. So I'm going to use the colours, the colour that I mixed, and I've just put on my paint. So you'll see that it goes really lovely and fuzzy, and you can just move it around until you cover the area that you need. Now when you're making a watercolour, it's best not to go over the same place a lot of times and really paint it. You just need to put the paint onto the surface of your paper and then lightly move it around. So I'm going to go a little bit darker for this one. So to make it a bit of a brighter blue, I'm going to mix in my paintbrush and lift up some more of the paint. I'm going to put it on here first, and I'm going to use a little bit of orange, and then I'm going to put it on. So very gently. Okay, so I'm quite pleased with that. I put a few little lines in. And now I'm going to put some of the other larger areas of my picture in, and that is these trees in the background. Now they're quite dark in Emily's picture, so I'm going to mix up. In fact, there's lots and lots of different colours in hers. She's got purples and blues and browns and yellows and lots of different greens, but I'm just going to keep mine simple, and I'm going to use some green and some brown, maybe a little bit more green there, and a tiny bit of blue, and I'm going to put this next area in. Now sometimes when you're painting, it's good to use your paintbrush in the same way that the shapes appear. So if you're going to do something that's round, you could do kind of round marks with your paintbrush. So I'm going to carry on very simply, very quickly, just adding the colour. Don't forget to keep adding some water so your paint stays nice and watery. Now, the next biggest area that I have is the tree itself. So I'm going to start to look at the colours, and you can look outside and look at your own tree and see the colours that you can see, and then start to see how you can replicate them within your colour palette. So I'm going to try a nice yellowy green for part of my tree. And I'm going to add that very simply, just a few strokes. I'm going to add to it so I don't have to cover all the white areas. Now, Emily simplified her trees into very strong shapes, so that's what I'm going to try and do with my picture. I'm kind of echoing the way that she painted. Now I'm going to add a yellowy orange colour, and I'm going to put some of the same shapes in, so it's kind of like a bit like this. And again, I'm going to look at the darkest parts of a tree and the lightest parts of a tree, which is something that I'd like you to do when you look at your tree. So some of the darkest areas I'm going to put in. I might even put a little bit of black in to make it dark. And then I'm going to kind of do some of those shapes. Now you can experiment with different ways of putting the paint on. You can dab sometimes, or you can do what I'm doing and do a kind of raggedy line. And now I'm going to leave the light areas along this side, some of the lightest areas on the tree, because I'm going to use a white of a paper to make it light. So I don't add white with watercolour. Just going to use the brightness and the whiteness of a paper to shine through the paint, and that's how you get the lightest areas. Now, when I look at this is quite the same kind of tone as the background. So I'm going to make the background a little bit darker now. As I keep adding, you're going to get more and more different colours appearing. Put that in very roughly. Now sometimes when you put paint on with watercolour, it looks really dark, but the thing about watercolour is that when it dries it becomes much lighter. So don't be afraid if you think something looks too dark, because it will get lighter. Now, I'm going to do some of the other larger areas. So I have this big area here, which is like a big rock, and I have some smaller trees, and I have what looks like earth as well. So I'm going to put that in around the tree. And don't worry if your colours start to overlap. They go all kind of wishy-washy together, because sometimes you get some really good effects when that happens. Put some more colour on here. And I'm going to put this on here, this tree here, next, which is a very strong shape. It's a triangular kind of conal shape. And then I have some darkness coming from the side. Now I'm going to put my rock shape on. So keep checking your colours. Make sure you don't use the colour straight from the palette, but you mix your own, because that's the fun of watercolour. And lastly, I'm going to put the trunk on, which is quite dark. Maybe when you do this, you can start to think about what it felt like when you touched the tree trunk. What was the texture of it? Now you can also see the tree trunk appear through the rest of the tree, just like we do. So I'm going to kind of go up there like that. And then I have some quite bold shapes here the branches of a tree, and I'm going to put those on. I'm going to keep adding. Now, keep reviewing your work, keep looking at it, see if you like it, see if you think there are areas that need improving, or that you could put some extra colour or extra marks on. I'm just going to start playing with this and thinking, what does this need? What does my picture need? So, what have I got here? I've got the background coming into my tree. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to start moving it around so it looks like it's part of the tree instead. Now, what I'd like to do for this is I'd like to take my tree and I'd like to make it stand out just a bit more. So I'm going to try and make the colours a bit brighter. So I'm going to mix up some green and some blue and some yellow. And make a nice acidy green colour. And then I'm going to put that on. Keep adding to it. But you'll also notice that I'm not really kind of working on top of it too much, because I just want to keep it nice and light. You can go over colours, but if you rub too much on a watercolour, the paper starts to go kind of soggy and it starts to disintegrate, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, because I think you can spend a bit more time than I did. But the last thing you do when you've done all your areas and covered it in colour is to put the detail on. Now, detail can be things like small leaves and branches and the detail that you can see. So you need to get a smaller paintbrush to put detail on and wet it. And then you can put some smaller areas into your picture. So I'm going to start to do this here. So I'm going to make it much more vibrant. And I'm using some of my ideas now and not copying Emily's work so much. So I'm going to try and make it a bit more how I would do it. So I'm going to put some of these lines on that Emily uses to create her trees. They're nice kind of rhythmic marks that she makes to show the shape of the trees. And then I might even define some of these shapes in the back here. And then I'm just going to do a little bit more detail on my main subject area, which is the big tree in the middle. So I'm going to use a medium paintbrush, and I'm going to introduce some bright yellow. And I think I can even see some blue in Emily's painting. So I might try that as well. Try a little bit of blue, maybe mix it with a tiny bit of green. Put some areas in. Because my paper is still wet, it's still going a little bit fuzzy when I put the paint on, and that's a good thing about watercolour. But if you want to do a lot of detail in your picture, you can wait until the paper is quite dry, and then the fuzziness won't appear. You'll be able to put very precise marks on if you want to. So I think I'm almost done. I maybe add a little bit more to this, but I think just to show you what Emily's painting has inspired may be enough today. Okay, so what you could do is have a really good look at your painting when you've finished, or you think you've finished, and then see if you answered some of those questions that we originally thought about when we looked at the tree. Think about the shape and the size and the light and the dark and the kind of character the tree would become if it could become a person, and see if your pictures answered some of those questions. Now, another good thing you could do is to talk to friends or your family, and you could describe to them the way that you made your painting. And also, if you were going to do it again, is there anything that you would do differently? Because every time we make a painting, we learn something new. And it's really good to think about that when you've finished a painting. Now, I'm sure that you're going to see Emily Carr's paintings in the future. There's a lot in Vancouver Art Gallery. And there's also, even in Vancouver, there's an art school named after Emily Carr. So you'll see her paintings, and hopefully when you look at her paintings, you'll think about the way that Emily made them, where she went to, and the process that she went through to make each painting. Now, I really hope that you've enjoyed creating your watercolour today, and I also hope that you're going to carry on experimenting with watercolour, because every painting that you make, you learn something and you get better at it. So I'm sure if you carry on experimenting with watercolour, you're going to get really, really good. So have fun with your painting.